Jinrui pretends to accept Duke Ren's offer while secretly plotting against him. Jinrui lowered her gaze just slightly, enough to appear measured, respectful, but not weak. She picked up her cup of jasmine tea, her fingers steady as she lifted it to her lips. She took a slow sip. Then, at last, she met Duke Ren's gaze and smiled. A calculated, almost knowing smile. "If survival is what you offer, how could I refuse?" she said smoothly. Duke Ren tilted his head, studying her. For a moment, she wondered if he could see through her act. Then he chuckled, a deep, rich sound. "Good." He refilled her tea, as if sealing their agreement. "A wise decision, Lady Jinrui. With my backing, no one in this court will dare move against you. Even Prince Liang Wei will think twice before trying again." Jinrui forced her fingers to remain steady. Prince Liang Wei, the one who had already tried to kill her. So Duke Ren knew. He had known all along. And yet, he had done nothing to stop it. Jinrui exhaled slowly, letting the illusion of obedience settle around her like silk. This was the first rule of survival in the palace. Never let them see your true intentions. She set her teacup down, lowering her voice into something smooth, grateful, convincing. "I am honored by your guidance, Duke Ren," she murmured. The noble's smirk deepened, as if he had already won. Jinrui smiled too, because he had not won, not yet. As Jinrui left the White Lotus Pavilion, a shadow stepped into her path. Minister Jong Wei. He was dressed in dark, elegant robes, his long sleeves hanging like the wings of a raven. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, locked onto her. "Lady Jinrui," he murmured, his voice as quiet as the rustling wind. "I must say, your talent for deception is impressive." Jinrui's breath stilled. He knows, but she did not let it show. Instead, she offered a polite bow, her face calm. "Minister Jang honors me with his words." Zhang Wei gave a low hum of amusement. "Duke Ren believes you are his," he said softly. "That was your intent, wasn't it? To make him believe you are an obedient little pawn." Jinrui did not answer. She did not need to. Zhang Wei watched her for a long moment before he sighed. "You play a dangerous game." Jinrui lifted her chin. "This entire court is a dangerous game." The strategist's lips curled, not in amusement, but in something deeper. "Perhaps," he murmured, "but not all players survive." He took a step closer, his gaze burning into hers. "I wonder," he said softly, "what kind of piece you are, Jinrui? A pawn? A knight?" His voice dropped lower, unreadable. "Or a queen?" Jinrui held his gaze, refusing to waver. "Perhaps," she said smoothly. "You will find out soon enough." Zhang Wei's smirk deepened. Then, without another word, he turned and vanished into the shadows. Jinrui exhaled slowly. Duke Ren thought she was his. Zhang Wei had already seen through her act. The game was changing. She needed to change faster. That evening, she returned to her chambers, mind racing. She could not move against Duke Ren too soon. He was too powerful, too well connected. But she could begin weakening him. Her fingers brushed over the silk ribbon in her hair, lost in thought. Then, an idea. She reached for a small piece of parchment, dipping her brush into ink. Her first move would be subtle, indirect, but it would plant the seed of doubt. She wrote carefully, her handwriting disguised. The Duke's interests are expanding too quickly. He gathers influence beyond his station. How long before his ambitions reach for the dragon throne itself? She let the ink dry, then folded the message carefully. A whisper of a rumor, a well-placed letter, a seed of doubt. By the time it reached the right hands, the emperor himself would begin to wonder if Duke Ren was becoming too bold. Jin Rui smirked. The Duke believed he controlled the game. He had no idea she had already made her first move. The court was buzzing with whispers. Jin Rui could hear them as she walked through the jade-tiled corridors of the palace, her silk robes brushing against the cool stone. Duke Ren's influence grows too bold. The emperor's patience is thin. He does not tolerate threats. If Duke Ren's ambitions are unchecked, he may be next to fall. Jin Rui did not slow her steps. She did not need to. She had planted a seed, and now it had taken root. That morning, during the emperor's daily court session, something remarkable happened. For the first time in years, Duke Ren was not called upon to advise on imperial matters. Instead, Minister Jong, the emperor's trusted strategist, stepped forward. A calculated shift, a small thing. But to those who understood the court, it was a warning. Jin Rui watched Duke Ren from across the Golden Hall. His expression was composed, but she saw it. The tightening of his jaw, the flicker of irritation in his gaze. He knew something had changed, and yet he did not know who had done it. Jin Rui lowered her eyes, masking her satisfaction. This was only the beginning. That evening, Jin Rui received a summons. Not from the emperor, not from Minister Jong, from Concubine Mein. Jin Rui stood in the entrance of the Orchid Pavilion, where the concubine's influence stretched like a spider's web. She was led into a chamber filled with soft incense, delicate silks, and golden lanterns. At the center of the room sat Mein, draped in red silk. Her lips painted the color of blood. She did not look up immediately. She simply ran her fingers over a fine porcelain cup, as if bored. Finally, she spoke. "Lady Jin Rui." Jin Rui bowed, watching carefully. "Your Grace." Meilin's dark eyes lifted. "You have been very lucky lately." Jin Rui remained silent. The concubine smiled, a dangerous knowing smile. "Luck," she mused, "is like a summer storm. It comes fast and vanishes even faster." Jin Rui kept her expression unreadable. This was a test, a warning. And then the trap was set. Meilin's fingers traced the rim of her cup. The Emperor's Council will soon discuss the next silk trade route, an important matter. She tilted her head slightly, and I suggested that you be the one to present the strategy. Jin Rui's blood ran cold. This was not a favor. It was a trap. If she failed, humiliation. If she succeeded, she would make more enemies. Meilin was watching her, amused, waiting. Jin Rui inhaled slowly, then bowed once more. "I am honored." She lifted her eyes. "And I will not lose." That night, as Jin Rui prepared for the upcoming council session, a shadow appeared at her door. Prince Xiao Luan. She froze. He was not supposed to be here. Yet there he stood, dressed in deep blue robes, his dark hair tied loosely, his expression unreadable. For the first time since he had saved her, they were alone. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Jin Rui's heart hammered. "This is dangerous," she whispered. Xiao Luan didn't answer. He simply took another step forward. "You could have died," he said, voice low. "That night, when Liang Wei's assassin came for you." Jin Rui did not react, but I didn't. Xiao Luan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Do you not care?" She frowned. "About what?" His jaw clenched. "About yourself." Jin Rui stilled, and then he stepped closer, too close. His fingers brushed against her wrist, light as a whisper. "Jin Rui," he murmured, "I cannot watch you be reckless anymore." Her breath caught. This was dangerous. More dangerous than court politics. More dangerous than Duke Ren's schemes. More dangerous than Concubine Mein's sabotage. She knew what he was trying to say. She could see it in his eyes, but she could not afford this. She slowly pulled her hand away. "I am not reckless," she said softly. "I am surviving." A heavy silence. Then she lifted her gaze. "And if you care for me, Xiao Luan, let me do that." Xiao Luan's lips parted as if to argue, but he stopped because he knew. She had already chosen her path, and there was no room for love in it. The Hall of Imperial Affairs was the heart of power within the empire. It was here that trade, war, law, and policy were decided by the emperor's most trusted ministers, generals, and scholars. And now, Jin Rui was expected to stand before them. The long table stretched before her, filled with men who had served the empire for decades, powerful, sharp-eyed, and waiting for the slightest sign of weakness. At the head of the chamber, the emperor sat upon his carved jade throne, watching everything with quiet amusement. To his left, Concubine Mein sat in a smaller, but still opulent seat. She had arranged this, and she watched Jin Rui with a delicate smile of anticipation. A smile that said, "You will fail." Jin Rui inhaled slowly. She would not. Minister Jong, the emperor's strategist, was the first to speak. "This council has long debated the expansion of trade routes to the western provinces," he said. "We must find a way to strengthen the silk trade without increasing taxation on the noble houses." He turned his gaze toward Jin Rui, eyes sharp as a dagger. "Lady Jin Rui," he said, "you have been given the task of offering a solution." A test? A trap? Jin Rui stepped forward, her silk sleeves whispering against the polished stone. She bowed once, then lifted her chin. "I propose," she began, voice clear, "a new trade corridor bypassing the overtaxed noble provinces." A ripple of murmurs. The nobles exchanged looks. Some sneered, others frowned. One of the older council members scoffed. "Impossible! The noble families have controlled the main routes for generations. You expect them to surrender their tolls?" Jin Rui expected their resistance, and so she smiled. She had come prepared. She turned toward the council members. "The noble families will not lose their tolls," she said smoothly. "They will gain new ones." A pause. Jin Rui walked toward the map laid out before them, placing her finger on a forgotten river route. "We divert trade to river transport," she explained. "New checkpoints will be established under Imperial control, bypassing the land routes. The nobles who own ports will still profit, perhaps even more than before." The room stilled. This was not what they had expected. Minister Jong narrowed his eyes. "And the cost?" Jin Rui kept her voice even. "Lower than war, lower than taxing the people, and lower than angering the noble houses." She turned to the emperor, her gaze steady. "This is the way forward." A long silence. Then, the emperor chuckled. It was a soft sound, but it commanded the attention of the entire hall. He leaned forward on his throne, watching Jin Rui with open amusement. "Interesting," he murmured. Concubine Mein's smile faltered. The emperor rose to his feet. "You speak with confidence, Lady Jin Rui," he said, "and confidence, when backed by intelligence, is a rare thing." He turned to Minister Jong. "Send a delegation to inspect the river routes," he ordered. "If they are as promising as she claims, we will proceed." A murmur spread through the council. Jin Rui had won. As the council dispersed, Jin Rui felt a presence behind her. She turned, and there was Concubine Mein. The concubine's eyes were calm, too calm. Her smile had returned, but it was different now. "You are clever," Mein murmured. Jin Rui held her gaze. So are you. Mei Lin chuckled softly. Then, she leaned in, whispering, Enjoy your victory, little one. It will not last. Jin Rui's blood ran cold. She had survived this battle, but the war had just begun. Jin Rui had sensed a shift in the court. The rumor she had planted against Duke Ren had done its work. His influence was slipping. The emperor had overlooked him in council. Minister Jong had begun rising in his place. But Duke Ren was no fool. And now, he was watching. Jin Rui felt his gaze on her more often, sharp, calculating. She knew that if she made even the slightest mistake, he would uncover her betrayal. So, when a servant arrived at her chambers with an urgent summons from Duke Ren, she was not surprised. But she was not prepared for what awaited her. Jin Rui entered Duke Ren's private study, where the scent of ink and sandalwood filled the air. The noble stood before a long table, studying a parchment covered in elegant calligraphy. He did not look up as she entered. I wonder, he mused, his voice smooth, if you have ever considered the nature of loyalty, Lady Jin Rui. Jin Rui kept her expression carefully neutral. Loyalty is earned, my lord. Duke Ren chuckled, spoken like a diplomat. Finally he turned, his gaze piercing. I have a task for you, he said, watching her reaction closely. Jin Rui's stomach tightened. This was the test. Of course, my lord, she said smoothly. What do you require? Duke Ren stepped closer, voice lowering. There is a merchant house in the western provinces that has been reluctant to pay their dues. He handed her a sealed letter. You will deliver this message to them, he said. Ensure they comply. Jin Rui hesitated, just for a moment, because she knew. This was not a request for diplomacy. This was a demand for obedience, submission, a test. If she accepted, she would be proving her loyalty, but she might also be helping Duke Ren strengthen his crumbling power. If she refused, he would know she was not his ally. Jin Rui forced herself to smile. She reached for the letter. Consider it done. Duke Ren's lips curled into a knowing smirk. Good. She turned to leave, her heart hammering. She had bought herself time, but she needed a way to turn this mission into her advantage. The next morning, Jin Rui stood in the Golden Hall, surrounded by scholars, nobles, and high officials. Concubine Mei Lin was present, seated at the emperor's side, her serpentine gaze flickering with quiet amusement. Jin Rui was focused on her task. She needed to convince Minister Jang to intervene in Duke Ren's dealings before she was trapped. But then, the worst possible thing happened. Prince Xiao Luan stepped forward, and he spoke her name. The court should recognize Lady Jin Rui's contributions, he said, his voice clear, strong. A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. Jin Rui's breath caught. New! The emperor lifted an eyebrow. Xiao Luan continued, undeterred. She has proven her intelligence before this court. Why then do we continue to treat her as an outsider? More murmurs, some in agreement, others in outrage. One of the nobles sneered. Careful, Your Highness. It would be unwise to speak too freely about a woman with no bloodline. Xiao Luan's eyes flashed dangerously. Jin Rui knew he was about to make it worse, but she was too far away to stop him. Xiao Luan turned sharply, facing the noble. She may not have noble blood, he said coldly, but she has more honor than most men in this hall. Gasps. Jin Rui felt the entire atmosphere shift. She could see Concubine Mei Lin's delighted smile, see the emperor's gaze darken, see Duke Ren watching carefully. And she knew. Xiao Luan had just made her a target. That evening, Jin Rui stormed into Prince Xiao Luan's chambers. He was seated near a low lantern, sharpening a blade. He looked up, smirking slightly. I was expecting you. Jin Rui shut the door behind her. What were you thinking? She hissed. Xiao Luan set the blade aside, his expression unapologetic. I was thinking that you deserve better than whispers and insults, he said simply. Jin Rui's hands clenched. And now you have painted a target on my back. Xiao Luan stood, closing the distance between them. You were already a target, he murmured. At least now, they know you are not alone. Jin Rui's breath hitched, because his gaze was too intense, too raw. She shook her head, stepping back. I cannot afford this. Xiao Luan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I know. His voice softened. But I cannot stop. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then, Jin Rui turned to leave, because if she stayed any longer, she might start believing she could afford to love him back. Jin Rui decided to execute Duke Ren's task, but in a way that weakens him instead of strengthens him. She rode into the western provinces under the banner of Duke Ren's authority. The merchant house she had been sent to intimidate, House Chien, was one of the oldest in the empire. They controlled precious silver mines and had the wealth to rival many noble families. Duke Ren wanted them to fall in line, to become his financial tool. Jin Rui had other plans. Instead of delivering Duke Ren's demands as a threat, Jin Rui approached House Qian's patriarch, Elder Qian Bo, with an offer. I do not come with a blade, she said, seated across from the elder in his vast study. I come with a warning. Elder Qian raised a bushy eyebrow. A warning? Jin Rui poured herself a cup of tea, calm, measured. Duke Ren believes your house is vulnerable. He expects you to submit. And if you do, your wealth will be his. The elder stiffened. Jin Rui leaned forward, lowering her voice. But there is a way to turn this to your advantage. She slid the sealed letter from Duke Ren across the table. If you wish to remain free, she continued, accept his terms publicly, pretend submission, but in the shadows, align yourself elsewhere. The elder studied her, intrigued. Jin Rui continued, Minister Jiang Wei is rising. If you lend your support to him, Duke Ren will find himself isolated. A long silence. Then Elder Chen smiled. You are not what I expected, he murmured. Jin Rui simply lifted her teacup and took a slow sip. The deal was sealed. Duke Ren would believe he had won. In reality, his hold on the merchant houses had just begun to unravel. Jin Rui had barely returned to the palace when she felt the shift. Servants paused their conversations when she walked by. Noblewomen whispered behind their fans. Court officials exchanged knowing glances. Something was wrong. She caught a low murmur from two attendants as she passed through the garden. The emperor is furious. He won't tolerate this kind of betrayal. Jin Rui's breath stilled. Betrayal? She kept walking, her mind racing. What had happened? Then, she saw Concubine Mein. The concubine was standing beneath the cherry blossom tree, sipping from a delicate cup of plum wine. She looked pleased. Jin Rui felt cold. She knew. Mein had set a trap, and she had walked straight into it.